Let's now tell you that the dissolution of the boards and management of Union, Keystone and Polaris Banks was announced by the Central Bank of Nigeria in a brief statement yesterday. The central bank said the action became necessary due to the non-compliance of the aforementioned banks and their respective boards with the provisions of the Banks and Other Financial Institutions Act of 2020, suggesting threats to financial stability of the system. The Apex Bank was, however, silent on the recommendations of the Special Investigator, that is Jim Obazee, appointed by President Bola Tinubu to probe the CBN. So this morning, joining me from Lagos, Nigeria for this conversation is Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO at Shared Dynamic Solutions. Mukhtar Mohammed, it's nice to have you around. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you, Lekon. Happy New Year to you too.
So looking at this latest move by the Apex Bank in Nigeria, did you expect this change of leadership in these banks?
To be sincere, I don't think I expected it. It came surprising because ordinarily, Titan Bank asked for extension that they were supposed to meet with the Special Investigator yesterday, which was supposed to be 10th. And even if the investigator said that he was not ready to meet with them unless they come at that time. So, but what we got was a different thing entirely. And even if the investigator is not mentioned, CBN have come up with other issues that have to do with corporate governance, with the big stick. But like in Africa, they say when the winch cry in the night and the baby die in the morning, then you could relate it that it was the winch that cried in the night that killed the baby in the morning. So definitely, I think there's no how the CBN can say that the Special Investigation report did not play a role in the decision they have taken.
Well, Mukhtar, a significant number of conclusions were connected to the report of the Special CBN Investigator who was actually assigned by Tinubu's executive order to look into the Monetary Authority and associated organizations in June of last year. Would you consider this a fight against corruption, most especially now as it occurs in the country's financial system?
Well, that report has not been made public. So what we saw was being leaked out to the press, like what normally happens in Nigeria. When there's a report, instead of going through the processes, you start hearing the press. They first of all judge you in the media and crucify you there before you even get to the point to defend yourself. And we've seen things happen like this, and we go to court and court overrule whatever whoever have come up with. So for me, I think the report was not handled well. The fact that 24 hours after the report was given to Mr. President, it was leaked to the press. Whatever reason they have done that, I think they've succeeded in achieving their result with the current decision from the CBN. Whether it's a fight against corruption or not, you see, when it comes to corruption, the court of law has the final say. Even when the Special Investigator made a clause that if they don't report, he will revoke their licenses. He doesn't have that power to revoke anybody's licenses because only the court of law that can revoke a license. I mean, an operational license of a bank. But again, the CBN have done that through the CBN Act, citing breach of issues that could warrant to that. But again, it's still subject to discussion. And why it has taken you this long to wait the big stick if you have been there, even if it's for 6 months, and it took the Special Investigation to come up with the report. So it depends. I'm still watching because Titan Bank never had any issue with their license that they acquired to operate as Titan Bank. The only issue was that they were the one that acquired Union Bank, and that has been their problem. For Keystone Bank and Polaris Bank, we know that these banks have been under a lot of issues, especially for Polaris Bank, what the current information that we are getting is not far. You media houses have carried out an investigation before now and was asking why could a bank like Polaris Bank be acquired for 40 million naira at that time. So we need to wait for the CBN. We are not waiting for the Special Investigation report this time. We are looking at corporate governance to wait the big stick. And so that puts to end whatever the Special Investigator would have been doing.
Well, pending time, we await full investigation and the actual reports to be made public. The CBN cited issues around non-compliance and other infractions by these banks. And looking at the way it has spiraled and it has, of course, leaked to the media, would you advocate for a total sweep in investigations on all financial institutions in the country, looking at the entire financial system and the scope to unravel shoddiness and deal with the issues in order to make it more vibrant, more accountable, more transparent?
No, I don't think so. We have each financial institution that have been doing well. Up to this moment, remember, we had the Soludo recapitalization, we have the Sanusi cleansing, we have the Emefiele issue now. And so most banks have stand the test of time in spite of all these issues that have come up. So you can't just because of one bank and then you now begin to look at that all other banks are doing the same thing. Remember, some of these banks have been established over 24 to 30 years ago. This bank has issued a Keystone Bank, Polaris Bank had issues and government took them over. And CBN, the same thing that the current CBN governor is doing, that was the same thing the former CBN governor did to take over Polaris Bank, Keystone Bank. And so Union Bank was the one that was sold to Titan Bank. So the shareholders of Union Bank also were not even in support of the taking over of Union Bank by Titan Bank, but that was overruled by the CBN, and they gave it to Titan Bank. So I don't think so, because that would create a lot of financial instability. And in a fragile economy like ours, we don't want to deal with issues like that, because the international community or international businessmen are still finding it hard to have business with us. And then you now come in with an institutional cleanup of your financial institution. That would be too much for the economy to handle at this stage in time. The CBN must improve their monetary issues of banks, which I think they've done before now. Banks declare what we call paper profit, but these days we've seen that banks have been doing well in terms of their profitability and also declaration of those profitability, and also they have been open to a lot of checks, and also the banks have been able to help the real sector of the economy. So definitely we mustn't just look at one incident and begin to say that's how all the whole banks are. These are incidents that has to do with corporate governance in terms of purchasing of these banks by a new shareholder. That's where the issues are coming up from. The issues are different from other issues.
Now, looking at the issue that's actually plagued these banks and, of course, the financial sector, you said it's not a big deal, but then it's still a big deal. But then a Nigerian Central Bank quoted a number of laws that the banks violated, and that's why a lot of spotlight is being shed on this particular issue with these three banks. Do laws that has to do with financial system regulation and all that, do all these laws lead to same punishments?
Well, I think it depends. Number one, the banks are supposed to, whatever happens, that you have to bring your audited report. And I think one of the areas that they pointed out that some of these banks have not been able to come up with their audited report. For Polaris Bank, until this takeover happened, they won many awards. They've come out of the wood. They've been profitability in that sector of the bank before the new taking over. And so that's why people felt that those takeover was done through political will. It wasn't really done because the bank was already making profit at the time it was taken over. For Keystone Bank, remember that the CBN have also put them up for sale, and a lot of investors were interested, and that process was truncated midway into it because of what the investors were not comfortable with what they saw. For Union Bank, there was nothing really happening to Union Bank until Union Bank also sold up their subsidiary in the UK to Fidelity Bank. So Union Bank was coming. Remember, they had new investors. They were trying to come in, but at a point, it was a shock to the investment committee and the financial sector that a bank that was just 2 years old in business, Titan Bank, acquired Union Bank. So when you look at all that, then you are not too surprised of what you are hearing now. For other banks, they've not been any bank that have not been corporate in terms of being responsible to their corporate responsibility, especially those that are listed in the Nigerian Stock Exchange. because they are forced to bring out their result at 20, and this result was open for scrutinization, and this result normally passed through the regulator, which was CBN, to approve before they are made known to the market. So you cannot say there was a rule that those other banks were not into that. And if you look at these banks that are really affected at this moment, these are banks that are not listed publicly to the exchange. So definitely you expect, but those that are listed to the exchange, they have to abide by the exchange rule of the corporate governance, and they normally release their result at 20. So I don't think, what I mean is not a big deal, because these three banks, if you look at their services to Nigeria, how many percentage of Nigerian banks in this bank, there's no cause for alarm. And again, the CBN have come in now to say that investors, customers' funds are safe in this bank. This has to do with just regulatory, wielding the big stick in the area of corporate governance and management, not doing the right process for taking over this bank. So I don't think we should so much worry ourselves that this will spring to other banks, but we have to be cautious also on the side of the CBN to make sure that they are doing the right thing. And what you are doing to Bank A, if Bank B does the same thing, you'll be able to do the same thing to them. But again, like I jokingly say, the regulator itself should also have been shut down for now, because even them themselves up to recently, they don't even bring us the audited result until the current governor came in and made sure we have a 6 years audited report of the banks, which exposed the bank to a lot of things that we discussed some time ago in terms of the amounts that they really have in terms of dollars reserve and others. So definitely, if it's culpable, also the CBN is culpable.
Okay, I understand that. Now, to quickly still dwell on the issue of the Titan Trust Bank. Now, the sponsors of the bank, that is TGI Group, said in a statement that they sold a business for $1 billion to fund the takeover. The acquisition was funded by a combination of debts to the tune of $300 million and an additional equity injection of about $190 million. So you've spoken extensively about how this came to be in terms of acquisition, but then are there other gray areas in this acquisition that we may need to consider?
I think for a burden of that, I felt that they should have given them ways to come in and explain themselves. Because they are not giving us data. And when you look at the data, what is the special investigator said is different. Then again, if you are bringing in such a capital, then it must have passed through the CBN, what we call capital importation. If you have passed through the CBN, is it on record that 190 million was brought in for the acquisition of this bank? So all these are subject to investigations and white papers being released or documents being shown to us. And for those that bought this bank, they could also decide to still go to court to challenge the taking over of this bank by CBN. So there's still it's still early days. So we expect a lot of fireworks going forward, unless they are trying to tell us that what the special investigator and the CBN have done is right, then we'll know where those fireworks. Because if you have invested the business and invested that money on that business, that business is taken over from you because of lack of corporate governance, I don't expect you to sit down and fold your hand. There will be a fighting back.
All right, Mukhtar Mohammed, CEO at Shared Dynamic Solutions. It was nice talking to you about this.
Thank you, Leko.
Well, it is quite unsettling looking at the incidences in Nigeria's financial system, but then experts say that one thing is certain, and that is the sudden removal of these senior management at these three major banks has actually cast a long shadow over the sector. But maybe the swift reaction of government would be the anchor to further steadying the ship within its financial space. Let's quickly go on a short break. We'll be back to talk more. Nigeria, a nation blessed with fertile land and abundant sunshine, faces a critical challenge, and that is ensuring food security for its over 200 million citizens. 2023 was a pivotal year for its agricultural sector, marked by triumphs and tribulations, policy shifts, and cautious optimism for the future. Let's now delve into the state of Nigeria's agriculture, examining food security concerns, the impact of government policies, the availability of seeds and fertilizers, and the hopes farmers hold for the year 2024. And to help us understand this, I have Kola Masha, CEO, Barbangona, joining me on the show. Thank you so much for being part of our show.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
Despite being a signatory to the Maputo Agreement in 2003 to allocate 10% of its annual budget to the development of agriculture, the Buhari-led government allocated the lowest fund to the sector. In 2022, it was about 1.51%. 2021 saw 1.92%. 2022 saw 1.25%. And last year, just about 228.4 billion naira was allotted to the sector, representing just about 1.05% of the total budget. Is this the bane of food insecurity in Nigeria, or it goes beyond it?
Well, I think, fundamentally, the biggest challenge we face is rising insecurity driven by a dramatic growth in youth unemployment. And, agriculture can play a very critical role around food security, but it actually has the opportunity to play an even greater role of addressing our rising insecurity by unlocking tremendous number of jobs. I think oftentimes we look at agriculture in isolation. When we think about its contribution to GDP, it's about roughly between 25 and 30% of GDP. But if you actually look at analysis done by very reputable organizations like the International Food Policy Research Institute, you see that the food economy, which is agriculture, all the inbound parts of agriculture, that's fertilizer, seeds, chemicals, all the outbound side around food processing, the food retail, et cetera, that actually is about 40% of GDP, hands down the single largest part of our GDP, and really has the biggest lever to drive economic growth and job creation.
Talking about some conflicts and insecurity that you mentioned, now the hardest farmers crisis is there. We have banditry attacks, insurgency in the northeast that have disrupted farming activities and displaced millions in the region. Why haven't we seen concrete results in decimating the perpetrators and probably reclaiming the lands despite efforts of the military?
Well, I think at the end of the day, you can treat the symptoms, or you can basically treat the underlying root cause. And I think the unfortunate reality is that oftentimes when efforts through law enforcement agencies and the military and so on and so forth tend to treat the symptoms of this insecurity, well, reality, if we need to delve into the underlying root cause, which is really that economic hardship that is felt in these regions. If you look at the northeastern part of the country, it's really no surprise that that was where we saw such a dramatic growth in insecurity. During the period of time from 2000 to 2007, where Nigeria saw one of the I think we were in top 5 fastest growing economies on the planet. You saw the rates of childhood wasting and childhood stunting grow by nearly 50% in these highly impoverished regions, which until we tackle that problem, it's going to be very difficult to resolve.
Now, let's now do more about government interventions. Now, over 80% of Nigeria's fertilizer needs are imported, actually making farmers vulnerable to fluctuations in global prices. Though the government, both at the national and the subnational levels, have tried as much as possible to provide interventions in this regard, we have not seen significant improvements, most especially for the farmers and overall in the agricultural sector. So is it as a result of inadequacy? Does it have to do with bureaucracy or what? We would even ask the question, why can't fertilizers be produced locally?
Well, I think it's a very fair point, and I think fertilizers make up typically about 50% of the costs of production for an average farmer. This is a crop farmer, and at the end of the day, Nigeria fertilizers are basically broken up into, let's call it, 2 major groups. You've got the nitrogen fertilizers, which are the if are equivalent to us as human beings, the carbohydrates, right? And then you've got other fertilizers that provide really a broader spectrum of nutrients for plants. Now, the good news is Nigeria actually has the potential to be one of the world's major producers of nitrogen-based fertilizers, because fundamentally that's the underlying raw material there is natural gas. So we've seen dramatic growth in installed capacity for nitrogen fertilizer plants. 10 years ago, we had one, Notori. Then Indorama came on stream and has added not 1, but 2 new trains. And then most recently, we've had Dangote Fertilizer come on stream, also with a large stream. So I think the reality is that we will probably see significant increase in investment on that side. The reality, though, is many of these investments are done in such a way where the primary expectation is to export that fertilizer and generate the foreign exchange to be able to service the very expensive loans that these companies have to take to build these billion-dollar, $2 billion, multi-billion-dollar facilities. So even though we are producing domestically, because these companies are typically pricing to export parity, as the naira devalues, we also see that price filter through to local production, local pricing. Now, with regard to the non-nitrogen fertilizers, I think the reality is there's opportunity in the Sokoto area. We have large phosphate deposits. I think they haven't fully been optimized and explored to see if we can play a critical role in producing phosphate fertilizers locally. But the reality is there are many types of fertilizers that we will have no option but to import. Thankfully, they are much smaller portion of what farmers use. The vast majority of what farmers use are nitrogen-based fertilizers.
So at this point, don't you think it would have made much sense if there's a legislation mandating fertilizer producers to allocate a portion to the local farming community? Because at the end of the day, whether we're trying to export fertilizers or export agri-produce, it still contributes to GDP growth and revenue realization. Do you think there should be a concrete, deliberate step or plan in that regards?
I think there's an opportunity to create a really a win-win situation for the fertilizer producers and the Nigerian farmers. I think at the end of the day, the major raw material for the fertilizer producers is natural gas, who the major customer who sells that natural gas is the Nigerian government. And so I think there might be opportunities to create innovative pricing within the natural gas system to ensure that the natural gas for the production of fertilizer for the local market is priced so that you are able to get that product as inexpensive as possible for the Nigerian market. I think that can create a win-win for both parties. And I think at the end of the day, the government subsidizing the natural gas that goes in to produce the fertilizer is going to be the most efficient use of a government subsidy versus subsidizing the end product.
Now, still talking about government interventions, in 2023, there was the Anchor Boros program. We had the National Agricultural Growth Scheme, the Dry Season Farming Initiative, and some other plans like that. Didn't their creation and implementation count for something within the space?
Well, I think at the end of the day, many of those programs were trying to address one of the most significant challenge facing the Nigerian agriculture sector, which is access to loans for farmers. I think, really at the end of the day, agriculture is 30% of GDP. If we're lucky, it gets maybe about 3%. I think some more recent data has shown that might go up to about 5% of commercial debt. But really, fundamentally, it's not getting its fair share of the quantum of commercial debts today. But I think there's even a bigger problem where if you look at the economy as a whole, is really not getting its fair share of commercial financing. I think if you look at bank assets, so that means loans that banks have on their books, it's about 15% of GDP. That's 15%. If you compare that to a country like Thailand, Thailand is 10 times the size, 150% of their bank assets are 150% of GDP. China is north of 200% of GDP. So there is a huge issue with finance in the sector more broadly, and specifically that the share going to farmers. Now, I think the way the government has been tackling that, where they've been very focused on leveraging their own balance sheet to effectively on-lend through financial institutions, it's admirable, but I don't think it's the most efficient and effective way. Really, at the end of the day, if you look at how most economies work, government plays a role providing implied guarantees to stimulate others to crowd in capital to lend to this sector. I think the U.S. is one of the best examples where the U.S. farm credit system unlocks $200 billion a year to finance their agriculture sector.
Okay, now, according to the World Food Programme, over 19 million Nigerians faced hunger in 2023, despite Nigeria being Africa's leading producer of staple foods, talking about cassava, rice, yams, maize, and some other staples. What policies would have aptly prevented this if the government had looked in that direction?
Well, I think first and foremost would be policies that are designed to crowd in financing into the agriculture sector. So particularly policies around unlocking. We have an immense amount of capital sitting in the pension funds that could be utilized under the right structure with the right types of guarantees from government, could be channeled towards efforts to finance the agriculture sector, and then being able to deploy it through financial institutions in a structure that helps to manage the real risks of lending to the agriculture sector. If we're able to dramatically increase the amount of capital through loans going into the sector in a well-structured way, then farmers will now have the ability to purchase the quantity and quality of inputs they need to get those high yields. And really, once we get those high yields, where today Nigeria's yields are typically about less than half of the yields of other developing nations, once we're able to get those yields up, which they can happen in a relatively short period of time, we're talking about 2-3 years with a concerted effort around unlocking access to finance, you will see the availability of commodities go up dramatically. You'll see prices start to moderate. You'll see a knock-on effect on moderation of inflation. And really, I think that is, if there's one key thing the government should focus on, it's that access to finance piece.
Yes, the government is also faced with reviving a sector challenged by low technology use, poor storage facilities and processing practices, as well as adequate financing. And you've mentioned that a few minutes ago. So what must be done to improve the sector along its value chain?
Well, it really takes a focused approach. I think oftentimes people think about agriculture as one sector. The reality is it's a multitude of many different commodities, value chains, and so on and so forth. And we firmly recommend that the government take an approach where they assess the sector and looking at it through a lens we call the 4 cornerstones of job creation, by identifying which value chains really have the biggest impact on job creation, which is the biggest problem the government needs to solve most urgently. And then once you identify that, then you basically go within that value chain and identify the top 3 issues that will have the biggest return on effort. I think oftentimes we don't see that level of focus. And because you don't have that level of focus, ability to execute and really create the impact that we need really isn't there. I think we've seen many government policy documents that have, they're well-meaning, but at the end of the day, they're trying to solve, they're trying to basically boil the ocean. They're trying to solve 20+ commodities or value chains at the same time, which is something that quite honestly would take decades if you were actually trying to fix all of those, versus identifying those top 2, 3, 4 value chains and really focusing in on those.
Well, definitely that means something needs to change. And stakeholders are saying that empowering women in agriculture and supporting the youth will play a crucial role in long-term sustainability in that particular sector. How do you think that the government can get this done, most especially making it more attractive, making it all-inclusive and less burdensome?
Well, I think the reality is that the technology exists, right? I think over the last 2 decades, there's been a lot of work to try to ensure that we have reasonable seed varieties that provide decent yields. There's still opportunity for improvement there. The fertilizer products exist. The agrochemical products exist. There is still an opportunity to improve access to mechanization and things like that. But really, at the end of the day, that has slightly lower. That's more of an impact on labor productivity versus actual farm productivity. It really, the biggest hurdle to a farmer being able to get that level of productivity is that access to finance, because it costs a typical farmer, somewhere around $500, $600 per hectare to buy all the goods and services they need to get those high yields. And you're asking a farmer who maybe was earning, $1 a day, $2 a day, to somehow come up with $500, $600 in equity to finance this, and it's a non-starter. So once you solve that problem, I believe once you solve the access to finance problem, many of these other issues will naturally solve themselves.
Would that also help solve issues around droughts and floods that has decimated lots of farmlands and also affected production cycles, most especially for smallholder farmers? Do you think that funds, and aside that, there are other things that can be put in place to help them deal with these perennial issues, most especially as it affects climate change?
Well, I think the unfortunate reality is climate change is here, and hopefully the world comes together to try to address it and reduce the issues. But I think at the end of the day, we are going to see significant increase in volatility of rainfall patterns. I think at the end of the day, there are ways to mitigate for that, be it availability of insurance products, ensuring that you are preparing the land in such a way that you are able to either retain water, or if the risk is flooding, ensure that you're able to drain your farm in the event of a flood relatively effectively. So there are steps that one can take to mitigate for these risks. They are real, but I wouldn't say that, as someone that's been actively farming in the agriculture space now for going on to nearly a decade and a half, they're risks that can be managed.
Kola Masha, CEO, Baban Gona, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on Business Edge.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. As Nigerians usher in 2024, cautious optimism fills the air and continued commitment to policy implementations, just as our guest has said, including increased investments in infrastructure, the use of technology and effective interventions can revolutionize farming practices and improve efficiency in the agricultural space for Nigeria. And we hope that that will be put into consideration by the Nigerian government. Thank you so much for being part of today's edition of Business Edge. Do not forget that we will be here tomorrow, same time, 11 a.m. West African time. But then, in the meantime, don't forget to visit our social media platforms at News Central TV. You can also head on to our website, www.newscentral.africa, and quickly download our mobile app on App Store and Play Store. Thank you so much for your time. I am Dikon Onobanjo. Enjoy your day.